Hello, Internet, and welcome to yet another Wednesday serial. This time I'm running through the X line of books, and I think I got them all. So let's start off with one of my favorites, which is Wong's take on Deadpool. First, we have the end of the first arc, which is Deadpool's been implanted with Carnage, who's regrowing through him, and they have Dr. Octopus tied up with this, and it's a bloody, gory, fun affair. And then the professor that Deadpool met during this caper, they go out on a date and have a fun time. It's just a weird, fun issue. Um, I don't know. I'm enjoying this. It's a fun book. This isn't, the next Kelly's run of Deadpool or anything, but it's a genuinely fun book, which is maybe where Deadpool should be. I don't know. Then next is Sins of Sinister. You have Immortal X-Men 3 ending. You have Nightcrawlers 3 ending, and then Storm and the Brotherhood of Mutants ending. So the first two in particular actually reminded me a lot of like Meta Barons, but done PG-13, which is a weird thing to get out of an X book. But I kind of enjoyed that. And then the Storm run is more like the Witch version of Storm, a la the old Magic 4-issue mini that Claremont did, and playing off of that, but in the future, tying in kind of with all the Sins of Sinister stuff. I don't know. And then we get to the end of Sins of Sinister, where all the events didn't happen, and then we put Sinister in the ground for a while. Nifty. It's kind of interesting how this whole event happened. For the most part, you didn't need to read it for continuity, which is fine. The books were actually kind of fun, if a bit hard to follow, because each issue was like years apart from the last one, and so things were kind of just happening, and they wanted you to track, but it was a hodgepodge. I don't know. I don't know if it was super successful, but it was a fun idea, and they're like fun sci-fi comics. So I don't know. Interesting. Hardly the worst failure. I would recommend it above a lot of other things, but a lot of things above it as well. They're just an interesting diversion, I guess. And for the X books, where I got more out of it for that. I don't know. Next is Bishop War College, which more than any other book I've ever read, I've gotten more from perspective on Twitter from this book, and understanding a lot of Black fans and how they've felt about X-Men, and then seeing this through their eyes has been informative, and maybe pushing on some of my cultural expectations and whatnot. And so that's been kind of interesting. And also interesting to see that this book has been mostly well received after some hiccups with Miles Morales happening a few years ago. I don't know if you remember, like, there's the What If series with Miles Morales, and there was a couple issues of that where people were none too thrilled, in particular with the Thor version of Miles. So seeing this sing is actually really interesting, especially because this uh, black version of the X-Men on this other world has things in a much more peaceable state. And Bishop gets to see a version of himself that didn't have to fight all of his life, but grew. And that was interesting. And so I think it's an interesting moment for Marvel, because it's a moment of using black excellence as a positive mirror to almost make our world that we're used to with Marvel seem more dystopian, which is a good twist in and of itself, but also spoke to a lot of political realities that they're going for with the Krakoan age and whatnot. It was actually pretty divisive and a really good sci-fi story told well through having less action instead of more. Marvel Comics needs more of this thought wherever this is coming from. So yeah, I it may not be the best book ever. It may have some slip ups. It may not, whatever. Um, I think this is doing more to sell the idea and the message of X-Men than any other book that they've had. And I didn't see it until this issue, but cool stuff. Sorry, it's a dark and stormy night here. So, next up is Rogue and Gambit. This is a fun heist thing, though I didn't know how much I loved it. There's a moment here where Gambit ties someone to a stove and basically sets one of his cars to go off on a time delay, and some Avenger hero has to save the civilian. Rogue and Gambit use it to get away, and I felt out of character for them. Felt kind of weird. Didn't love it, but overall, it's a fun runaway book. I don't know. It's something. It, mm. Next is New Mutants Lethal Legion. This Lethal Legion stuff, I think, has been the best of the New Mutants since the Krakoan age. Playing with this Lethal Legion idea, playing against the realities of what Krakoa represents and how different mutants are viewing the world, I think it is an interesting mirror in that everyone of a group isn't going to agree on something the way that Krakoa has been pushed. So I like that as well. Sabretooth and the Exiles was kind of a bummer. Back when this started as Sabretooth, really, there was a lot of Christian allegory stuff that I thought was holding the book down. And now that we're here and some of the Dark Mirror stuff and the Christian allegory, instead of using anything else or having any more creative thought about it, it just kind of happened, and it's the Krakoan version of hell. Ooh. Um, X Men #1, the old one, reprinted. This was weird to look through because in recent years I've read a lot of earlier X Men with Damian. Um, I've obviously read some early Spider Man, and then I also read some early Fantastic Four and early Daredevil more recently. And I have to say, of all the early Marvel stuff I've read, especially the #1s, I think this is the weakest. I think of all that early Marvel stuff, early X Men is the stuff that grabs me the least, which is kind of interesting because it's one of the two like Marvel stuff I've followed for the longest, that and Spider Man. And I don't really like the early X Men stuff. I never really have. And just kind of coming to that and realizing, like, going back and reading like early Daredevil is kind of interesting for me because I really liked a lot of it. Even some stuff that a lot of other people thought was not as great with early Daredevil, I really like. Don't get me wrong, there's a handful of issues of early Daredevil that is just not particularly great. There's a few stinkers in there, but to me, those stinkers like are maybe the best issues of X Men comparatively. It's just basically until Claremont jumped on X Men, I don't really care. And even the really early stuff of Claremont, I don't think is particularly good. I don't think he gets his stride till what about a year before Dark Phoenix or anything. So I don't know. It was just interesting to go back and realize how invested I am in X Men now, and its origins were the least interesting part to me, and all that. So I don't know. Back to the modern Wolverine 32. This is playing on something with Wolverine that Wolverine keeps coming back to. With Weapon X, with the Canadian government, again, the American government at one point, the enemy of the state. Shield has done it. Sinister has done it, and so many evil scientists try to make Wolverine into a brainless weapon and make him do the bad thing and take him to the bad place. And now it's Beast who's done it. And so it's this story again. But this one does have some fresh takes. Obviously, Beast was his friend. It came from a different place, and it was from this Krakoan era. So there's a few elements that are new. but they don't even feel that new because Percy has made Beast into an irredeemable monster, which is not the most interesting thing to do with the character. I think having a character that would be conflicted about what he's doing in the name of pragmatism would be more compelling, but that's not the case. I know a lot of people agree with me, but as opposed to fans disagreeing on something like the Mary Jane thing, where they are telling a story that they want to tell, but they're telling it poorly. Here, Percy's telling a story he wants to tell. I don't love all the elements, but he's telling it well. And it's really interesting because at the end of this, Beast is essentially found out, but he's already escaped. And Xavier basically says for no one to track him, there's a political convenience of letting Beast continue to protect Krakoa, and that's what they're going to do. The other wrinkle with this issue, as pictured on the cover, is there are a bunch of clones of specifically Logan Wolverine and a bunch of clones of Beast. And so Beast has created his own little department with only the two elements he feels he needs, the brains and the weapon. And it's compelling to me in the sense that what he is doing to Wolverine, he is also doing to himself. And that, I think, is the biggest twist that makes this work and makes it different than all the other times the story has been told. Is that by doing it to himself and doing the same thing and recognizing the negativity of it, but holding to it is a very odd thing and a twist on the story you don't normally see. And I'm very fascinated to see where this plays out because I honestly don't know where it's going, and it's a fresh spin on an old story, so I'm still excited. From that, X Force continues. They bring in the other Wolverine. Sage is running X Force now, and they have some interesting things going. And now X Force is going to have oversight from the Quiet Council in Colossus. But if you've been keeping up with the books, Colossus is technically a secret agent for the Russians as well, which makes this book exactly what the entire Krakoan era should have been always and has strayed away from, which is a political thriller, and at least as the main through line. So Percy continues to be the level best creator on everything with the Krakoan era. Then we get to some stuff in X-Men I like less overall. You have this X-23 Deadly Genesis book. Don't love it as much, but it's happening. And if you love the character, it's another story with her in the days of her prime, I guess. Uh, Next is this X-Men and Captain Marvel, story with the Brood. Now, you've probably seen bits and pieces in particular of this issue. This is just moving it along, and sadly, we don't get any reconciliation between Captain Marvel and Rogue, which it feels like we should at this point. I don't know. But here, if you've been keeping up with the story, the Brood rape murders Cyclops' dad, who's one of the people they can't bring back. He's not a mutant, so he's outside of the system, which seems odd, especially now that they're doing stuff with humans anyways. And his dad's DNA seems like it would be in there. Uh, that sounded a little dirtier than I meant, but also maybe I meant it. But Cyclops is upset because the Brood just rape murdered his dad, because that's what the Brood do. They impregnate people and they explode out. And Cyclops is upset. Also, the Brood is the Brood, which for sci-fi terms, if you're familiar, I imagine you are, the Brood are the biological take of what's normally presented through with cybernetics, like the Cybermen or the Borg, which represent kind of this encompassing element in the universe that is ever present, and it is essentially a death. Not just something that will kill you, but something that wipes out cultures, something that wipes out species, and is just this ever present death. And Cyclops, when presented with something, essentially a way to genocide the Brood, basically says, let's go for it. And Jean Grey has this big moral oral moment about, we don't do this. And then there's this thing about sometimes Cyclops is wrong because a character, Brew, who from the Wolverine X-Men days of Jason Aaron writing that, um, came forward, and he's a mutant brood, but he's a 1 in billion chance, essentially. But he has a consciousness. He doesn't try to kill people unless he goes feral, um, and is relatively intelligent. And is this character that's been beloved by fans because he's presented to be this cute kid in a bow tie and whatnot. But and he's a 1 in a billion chance. And so in front of this kid, Cyclops is like, "Yeah, let's genocide him." Gotta love the tact and candor. But Cyclops is upset, yes, but he also genuinely believes it. And Jean Grey goes on this thing about that's not what they do, and you can kind of get the vibes. They don't even say it even directly necessarily, but Dugan again seems to miss the philosophizing of what he's going for. He doesn't seem to understand the deeper levels of what he's trying to tell with his story. So genocide is wrong, guys. Yeah, I mean, coming out of my mouth, that sounds insane. Of course, genocide is wrong because when we talk about genocide in real world terms or basically any fictional terms, we're talking about eliminating a people, a culture, a group that thinks or lives differently, but they have the right to live, of course. But this is why I hinged on that Borg Cybermen brood. They need other cultures to destroy to live, but all that they live to do is destroy everything in their path. It is the time or the moral argument for the genocide of that and that alone stands because the principles that you use to say genocide is wrong is to defend life, to defend culture, to defend diversity, to defend variety and thought and life and vibrance and what is good. And when you defend the Cybermen, the Borg, or the Brood, you're defending the antithesis of that. So it just doesn't read right. And so Dugan has this bit where Brew is sent off with a few other brood hatchlings, I guess, and basically says, like, I hope you can go and redeem yourselves, whatever that means for the brood. I'm sure it's gonna come back. I'm sure there's gonna be something, but it rang really hollow. The brood are on their way to go attack Earth again, but with a more overwhelming force. This is a cosmic level story with a team up with X-Men and Captain Marvel, and they're just killing brood left and right. But how are they going to stop it if they don't stop them? Stopping one brood is stopping one brood. There aren't really leaders. There aren't really. I mean, I know there's the queen or whatever, right? But you can't just kill the queen. You have to kill the entire hive to make them stop. Even if you're not genociding them, you are annihilating the force. And then essentially, and this is the thing that I never got with Star Trek, is like, if you annihilate a big enough force and you piss them off, they're probably just going to send a bigger one. Now, I'm just going to go on a tangent because hell, we're here. In Voyager, the end episode is Janeway striking a major chord against the Borg. And all these spheres and cubes and whatnot like blow up, and then the Voyager is out on the other side. They're in the Alpha Quadrant, a la the admiral of the one who didn't make the choice, pushing them to it, even though it's arguably immoral, whatever. Really arguably immoral. And then they end up on the other side. Hooray. Okay, and maybe for the lifetime through the Voyager crew, the Borg don't show up. But maybe a generation later, like the Borg have always supposed to have been coming to the Alpha Quadrant. What happens when they actually do show up and get there and it's not a stray cube or whatever? What do? You kind of have to kill them all or lose all the diversity of everything that they've shown in Star Trek. Which is the moral choice? We have the Brood here, which is the moral choice. Eradicate the one thing that wants to eradicate literally everything else. Or don't, and they'll just keep coming. I don't know. It just did not ring at all because it wasn't played through. So after all that, and there's all these grand operatic ideals and whatnot, we get to Extreme X-Men. Claremont brings back Ogin's ghost from Kitty Pryde and Wolverine the Mini from way back when. That villain is back, and this his last team that he wrote is dealing with that very much in a setting, very much in particular circumstances of their day, and they deal with that story, and it's sold through setting and character and tense moments. And it's a little bit slower, and there's some actual human characters there that haven't been introduced or anything but are part of the story. And it's not anything about legacy, it's not anything about being the biggest, most explosive event you're ever going to read. It's just a good story told well with a villain that's arguably familiar. That's it. And that's more of what we need. So, I don't know. Overall, I was really taken with this pile of X books, and it was a nice reminder of why I like so many of these books. And that was cool. There's definitely some stinkers in there, but is what it is. So, anyways, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you keep reading.